Anne asks her client how many men she's been intimate with that year, to which the young woman responds with 7. Anne warns her that the opposing side will try to paint her as promiscuous and argue that she consented to everyone to win the case. The young woman begins to cry, and Anne tries to calm her by saying the hearing will be private and the judges will know how to handle her case. As they leave, Anne asks the media not to take photos of her client, so they decide to interview the victim's mother instead. Later, Anne returns home, where her husband Pierre tells her that his son, Theo, was arrested for hitting one of his teachers, who pressed charges, and now he has to go to Geneva. Anne then takes her daughters to school and meets her sister Mina at work. Anne tells her that Pierre will bring his son to live with them, but Mina reminds her that the boy is very troubled. Minutes later, Mina's son, Lucas, arrives with his father, and Mina tells him to behave while she finishes helping her clients. Anne offers to take Lucas to play with her daughters, but Mina says no, mentioning she'll be too tired from her terrible job. In the afternoon, Anne returns home and picks up some things lying on the floor, placing them in a room. She then meets Theo and welcomes him, telling him she left his things in his room and asking him not to leave them scattered around the house. Anne explains that the closets in that room are hers, but the young man ignores her, only mentioning that he'll lose his friends within a year from being so far away, and then he shuts the door on her. The family later gathers to talk, mentioning that Theo used to live with his mother. Seconds later, Theo joins them for dinner, and the girls give him a welcome gift, a keychain, for which he thanks them. Later, Anne is on a call when she finds the keychain her daughters gave Theo on the floor, so she decides to put it in her bag. Meanwhile, Theo is playing with his sisters, and moments later, Anne arrives in the room. That night, Pierre arrives home and sits down to eat, complaining to his wife that he feels unappreciated at work because the company suspects him of embezzling money, so he plans to request an audit to clear his name. His wife approaches to comfort him, suggesting they go to bed. In the bedroom, Pierre tells Anne that his son thinks he's a fool, saying he adopted the girls to ease his guilt over not being there for them while they were growing up. Anne tells him Theo isn't so bad since he gets along well with the girls, even if he only sees them as a couple of old fools. Moments later, they share a romantic encounter. The next morning, Theo is smoking in his room when his father enters, telling him not to smoke inside the house, prompting Theo to throw the cigarette on the floor. Pierre tells his son they're trying to make him feel comfortable at home, and asks him to make an effort too, but Theo ignores him and orders him out of his room, claiming he's studying. Pierre confronts him, snatches his phone, and this angers Theo, so Pierre eventually returns it. In the afternoon, Anne meets her sister to head to the lawyer's home together, but upon arrival, they find the place in disarray. Anne calls Pierre to tell him someone broke into the house and stole a bag she had by the entrance. Shortly after, Theo arrives and Anne asks him to check his room to see if anything of his was stolen. Moments later, Anne is in her office to inform a client that he has won custody of his daughter, for which he thanks her. Upon returning home, Anne is doing laundry and, while checking Theo's pants, notices that the keychain is in one of his pockets. She takes the keychain to Theo and asks how it ended up back in his pocket when it was supposed to be in her purse, which was stolen. Theo tries to act clueless, but Anne tells him that now she knows he was the one who robbed the house. Theo says he doesn't care if she reports him, but Anne explains that this isn't true since he already has a criminal record, so she advises him to try to integrate more with the family if he doesn't want her to tell his father and report him to the police. In the afternoon, Theo helps Anne carry some things and then joins the family for a swim. There, the young man tells his stepmother he was a vegetarian for 2 years, but eventually got tired of it. Theo invites Anne to swim with him and his sisters, and she agrees. They begin playing together in the water. Later, the family returns home, and the next morning, Theo and Anne are smoking in the garden. Anne asks her stepson when he started smoking, to which he replies that he was 12 because his mother loved smoking. Anne asks if he misses Geneva, but he says no, explaining that the people there only care about money. Anne then asks Theo about his tattoos, and he tells her he did them himself, offering to give her one. The lawyer initially declines, but eventually gives in to Theo's persistence. That night, Anne is reading when Theo appears with a young woman named Amanda, telling his stepmother they'll be busy in his room. The next day, Pierre and Anne attend a meeting with Pierre's co-workers, but Anne starts to feel bored and sits on the stairs, where she encounters Theo, who invites her to go buy cigarettes. Moments later, they head to a bar to have a few drinks, and Anne asks Theo about his girlfriend, Amanda. Theo explains that she isn't his girlfriend, as he doesn't like getting romantically involved with anyone. Theo then asks Anne about her relationship with his father, but Anne replies that it isn't a topic she considers interesting for young people. Theo then asks how many men she's been with, but Anne dodges the question. Upon returning home, Pierre scolds Anne for leaving while they had guests over, but she tells him they're very boring, asking him not to become one of them, which angers him. The next day, Anne is talking with Mina until Pierre arrives, greeting his children and nephew. That night, Theo is watching a movie on his phone when Anne enters his room to ask what he's watching, and Theo invites her to watch the movie with him. They both watch the movie, and moments later, they decide to kiss, leading to a romantic encounter. Afterward, Anne tells her stepson that what they just did was a mistake and that they need to forget about it. But Theo jokes, implying that it will inevitably happen again. Later, Pierre tells his wife it was a long day at work because it was filled with meetings. But Anne starts to feel guilty about what happened between her and Theo. Anne then tells Pierre that she bought Theo a computer for school. Pierre asks why she didn't inform him, as he could have bought it himself, then thanks her, mentioning it was a very kind gesture on her part. The next day, Theo is playing and chatting with his sisters before going over to his stepmother to offer her a beer. He then takes out a recorder to capture their conversation. Theo asks her several personal questions to get to know her better, eventually asking who her first love was. Anne explains that she'd rather not talk about it, but Theo reminds her that she promised to answer all his questions honestly. Anne says she doesn't want to answer, as things have happened that shouldn't have. Theo asks if she's referring to them, but the lawyer clarifies that there is nothing between them. Theo continues asking suggestive questions, but Anne says she doesn't want to say anything because she's afraid. Theo stops the recording and apologizes, and moments later they share another romantic encounter. Later, Anne meets with one of her clients named Sarah to discuss a case. Anne suggests they go for a walk to talk, but soon realizes something might be wrong at home. She decides to call the Department of Child Protection to understand what's happening with the young woman. Days later, the family prepares to celebrate one of the girls' birthdays. While they're setting up, Theo starts approaching Anne flirtatiously, but she tells him to stop, as they could get into trouble if someone sees them. Later, as they celebrate, Anne's daughter asks her to help fill a water gun. While they're away, Theo approaches again, trying to flirt. Anne tells him he's crazy and that it's not a good time, but he tries to persuade her until Mina catches them. Anne tries to explain the situation to her sister, but Mina ignores her, only saying she can't stay there any longer. They all gather to sing to the birthday girl, and the next day, Theo approaches Anne again. Anne tells him that what happened the day before was wrong since they were caught. She tells Theo that things are clear, they need to end their relationship immediately. Theo asks if she will tell his father, but she says no, as they need to keep the secret if they want to keep the family together. They both agree to keep silent, and Theo asks if she's just going to leave him like that. Anne explains that this was inevitable, and that he will forget her and eventually find a girlfriend. Theo says he doesn't want to, and asks for a goodbye kiss, to which she agrees. As he leaves, Theo tells Anne that she'll get jealous when he starts dating beautiful girls. Moments later, Anne has a meal with her husband. Pierre mentions that Mina called that afternoon, and Anne asks what she said. Pierre says he doesn't know because she didn't leave a message. Pierre then tells Anne he plans to go on a trip with Theo to his cabin to spend time together, as he thinks it would be good for them to bond, which makes Anne nervous. Pierre asks if something is wrong, and Anne explains that he's never done that with his daughters. Pierre responds that it's necessary for him and his son to spend some alone time. That night, Anne reads a story to her daughters, and one of them asks why they didn't go to the cabin with their father and brother. Anne explains that they need to spend time alone. Later, Anne tries to reach her husband, leaving a message to check if everything is okay. She then goes to Theo's room and takes the recording tape from their conversation the other day. The next day, Anne takes her daughters to her sister's house, and on the way back, she has an accident while trying to reach her phone while driving. Anne and her daughters take a taxi home, where they realize Pierre has already returned from his trip. One of the girls tells Pierre that their mother wrecked the car, and they all gather for dinner. Pierre mentions to his wife that Theo is with Amanda, and then begins sharing details about what he and Theo did at the cabin, throwing subtle hints at Anne, making her uncomfortable. Later, Pierre tells his wife he wants to talk to her, explaining that he spoke with Theo and that both were happy to reconnect, like when Theo was young. Pierre shares that Theo confessed he was having an affair with Anne. Anne remains silent before saying that it's ridiculous, reproaching him for believing such a lie. Pierre says he doesn't know what to believe anymore, so Anne tries to explain that Theo is just seeking attention. However, Pierre says that Theo explained everything in detail. Anne acts offended, packs her things, and tells her husband she won't tolerate him believing his son's lie, as she was only trying to get along with Theo. Pierre asks her to consider his position, so Anne confesses that Theo was the one who stole from them previously, but she hadn't told him to give Theo a second chance. The two embrace, both starting to cry. The next day, Theo joins them for a conversation about the situation. Pierre tells his son he regrets not being there for him when he was young, apologizing, but also tells him that the accusations he made at the cabin are very serious and that he shouldn't make up stories about Anne. He says it isn't Anne's fault that he and Theo's mother separated. Theo insists that everything he said at the cabin was true, asking Anne to admit they had an affair, but Anne pretends not to know what he's talking about. Pierre asks his son to admit that what he said at the cabin was a lie if he wants to continue living with them. Anne approaches Theo to pressure him into admitting that none of it was true, but he only grows angry and leaves. Later, Theo loads his suitcases into the car trunk, says goodbye to his sisters, and returns to Geneva. Days later, Theo visits Anne at her workplace. In her office, he tells her she needs to tell his father the truth. Anne tells him she won't, as they had agreed not to say anything about it. Theo insists, threatening that he will report her if she doesn't. Anne explains he has no chance of succeeding, as no one will believe his story given his criminal record, making him untrustworthy. That evening, Sarah visits Anne to give her a gift for helping her escape from her father, allowing her to have a better life. Anne accepts the flowers and places them in a vase. Moments later, Mina approaches Anne, and Anne tells her she's glad she came. Mina explains their family and that she can't stay angry for long. Later, the family gathers for dinner, and they open presents. Anne discovers that her husband gifted her a bracelet. Days later, Anne and Theo meet with Theo's lawyer, as he has decided to file a report against her. Anne starts to vent, calling Theo a liar, but the lawyer asks her not to address his client directly. Anne tells the lawyer she agrees to reach a settlement with Theo to avoid a trial, which frustrates Theo. That night, someone knocks on the family's door. Anne goes down and realizes it's Theo. She asks what he's doing there, and he replies that he came to see her. Theo, clearly intoxicated, tries to seduce her, kissing her, and Anne gives in, and they have another romantic encounter.